Very long surname. It makes middle-aged men in the afternoon very breathless. So it was a good start. I was also noticing that the ex-sports rights holder guy and the existing sports rights holder guy, the only two people who are actually wearing leather shoes. The guys who got proper jobs have got proper shoes. Gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you very much for making the time. We're going to jump right in. There's a bit of a noisy bunch at the back. We'll ignore that. We've got 40 minutes, lots to cover. I think that the underlying theme is India, but I think it's more, I'd like to sort of explore this resurgence of growth in this decade. How is it different from the last decade? I think there's some structural differences there. But maybe I could sort of kick off. Boris, you could take it from here. Just introduce yourselves, talk to us a bit, because I think 2 out of the 4 of you have lived in Singapore and worked in Singapore. It's quite different. And one of you has lived and worked primarily in India, and one is doing a lot of business with India, but hasn't lived there. So I think it's good perspectives. You want to kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Unmish, and lovely to have this great panel. So I look after content partnerships for Meta family of apps in India. What it primarily means is that I get this great opportunity to work with different genres of content, gaming, music, sports, news, movies, production houses, and different kind of partners, again, like the gaming companies, music labels, sports federations, news, broadcasters, OTT platforms. And it's been an interesting one, as you mentioned, that I moved to India 3 years back after spending close to 15 years working with ESPN, Fox, and Viacom. So what I took back was this experience working across content genres, and what I learned and relearned in the last 3 years is working in this fantastic place that we're all going to talk about, India.
Okay, so you went back to a country which was different to the one you came back to. Yeah, fair enough. Akshat?
Well, I co-founded a company called NODWIN Gaming a couple of years ago, about a decade ago now. And what we've been able to go ahead and trying to go ahead and build is this gaming fun ecosystem around it. So while esports is the core of what we do, we try to go ahead and benchmark ourselves with a fan-first metric called time share of mind share. It's something that I've always espoused, saying that that's what we are after. So it doesn't matter to us whether my influencer is on Facebook or Meta and actually going and engaging with people on Instagram and then being watched with our friends at Router or YouTube, and then has a scripted content series that is available on Amazon Prime, and then finally goes and buys a headset that we sell on Flipkart. It doesn't matter. We're not a destination yet, and we don't want to be. We do believe that it's a community we need to be building, and kind of this is India. It's very multi-identity as a country. We were always very confused with lots of gods, lots of religions, lots of food, lots of identities, which is there. And I think it goes very naturally with us to go ahead and have this multivariate world that we engage with.
Would it necessarily mean that the multivariate world is no longer animal farm equality, but it's fundamentally both parties on either side of the trade have the optionality of opting out, which is not the case in television, not
Correct.
the case in radio. Would that be a fair?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And just to double click on that, it's not just an optionality to go ahead and walk out. It's a perspective. It's an optionality to double dip in.
Yeah.
Right. It's not only a choice. I don't want this. It's a choice. I want this, which is there. So people choose the currency of youth, which is time. The currency of youth is not money, unfortunately, right? But they don't have it, they don't earn it, they don't get it. They still would stay with their parents for about till they're 23, 24. Parents take care of everything in your life in India, but the currency that they have is time. And if you want to go ahead and really build really passionate, long-term value creating customers, then the value of India is this kid who's going to be 18 right now, but at 25, 27, when they earn and they can afford an Alienware, is when you want to go ahead and do this. So,
okay, time is money, so we'll come back to that. Bank of dad, bank of mom, always a good idea. Mandar.
Hello, thank you. I run Times Music, which is a top 8 music label and publisher in India, music publisher and a music label. We operate globally, distribute all the music, and operate various genres of music. India, as you know, is a multi-sliced market. We operate in most of them, from Bollywood to a whole bunch of other stuff. We also actually have Jungly Music, which is our film music acquisition business. We have FFS, which is what it means. It is which is our next generation A&R music discovery machine, sort of like a shape-shifting thing that works between as a mini platform to a record label and an artist management company. And I've been involved in the music business over the last sort of almost 28, 30 years. I was in Singapore in and out as part of the founding team of Soundbuzz, which was Asia's first digital music distribution company, and as part of Channel V, where I know our common friend, Mr. Jaspinder from.
Excellent. Thank you. Nick, warm welcome to Singapore. A bit different from Dubai, a bit more humid, but it's good to have you.
Thank you. Thanks, Unmish. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. So yes, I oversee sponsorship and licensing at the International Cricket Council, which, as Unmish says, is based over in Dubai. The ICC, for those who don't know, is what FIFA is to football, the ICC is to cricket. And you cannot have a conversation about India without mentioning cricket. You cannot talk about cricket without mentioning India, hence me being on this panel, and thank you for having me. So part of the ICC's remit is obviously the governance of the game. It's also staging the pinnacle events within the sport, and we, as we stand today, are on the cusp of perhaps the biggest sport event that the sport will have ever hosted. So the ODI Cricket World Cup to happen in India starts October 5th, 48 matches, final on November 19th, so a 7-week period where the eyes of the world will be on the sport of cricket. So a fascinating time for us. We're bridging into a new commercial cycle at the beginning of 2024, so a huge amount happening. We're going to the United States for a first World Cup next year in 2024, so a lot of talking points for us. But my sort of foray into the world of Indian sport and Indian cricket has been quite fascinating, and looking forward to sharing a bit more as we go through this conversation.
And you're characteristically modest in the fact that you haven't spoken about the other 11-a-side game, which is football, which you actually worked a lot with the City Football Group. Yeah, so Deborah mentioned CFG a little bit earlier on in her session. So that was my role before joining the ICC. I was involved in the commercial arm of CFG, which is another fascinating journey in its own right. And that, I suppose, was my first opportunity to cast my career eyes firmly and squarely on the subcontinent. The year that I actually departed, they had acquired a majority shareholding in Mumbai City FC. So, and a really interesting acquisition at the time. It was a signal of intent and ambition in a growing football market, but it's also a long-term play because football is, I think, still the 5th most followed sport in the country. So it is on a journey of its own. And the enterprise value will be materialized over quite a lengthy period of time. On-pitch success has come quicker for Mumbai City, but as I say, the enterprise value will come over decades, not years. Thanks, Nick. Actually, I want to come to you. It's a very nice segue. Nick spoke about football being the 5th largest. Would you like to enlighten the audience of the 2nd most popular sporting competition-based genre in India?
We're very proud to go ahead and have done that very recently. Esports became the 2nd most watched sport in the country of India. Till very recently, we were very small. Very proud to be very small. We are now playing with the big boys. Very recently on Star, we were on multiple linear channels at the same time and on digital. And I think it's the fact that the youth like it, right? But there's also this really fun part, which is what do youth like, which is the reverse question, which we all keep on asking. One of the reasons we invested in Jasper and branded was just this question, like sports matters, music matters, gaming matters, marketing matters. And earlier they were great verticals. And we are, at least in the country of India, looking at a conflux where everything mixes. And I don't want to call it khichdi, I want to call it a thali. It's a better way to go ahead and represent that, where we have each identity. See, in a khichdi, you destroy the uniqueness of everything and make something new. I think a thali does it better justice, where each item has its own purpose and then still brings a better whole together.
Mandar, we were talking before we came on stage about how the year-on-year growth of PRS revenues in India, which is the Recording Society, is going up relative to other countries, because if from an economics perspective you keep your currency stable, it's probably the best way of looking at music consumed per capita, per day, per year. Is that only the demographic dividend? Because that's common across what Paras does, what Nick's doing, what Akshat's doing. Or do you feel from a music perspective is demographic plus plus? And what might that plus plus look like, which is driving that velocity and variety of growth?
I think to take a step back, I'll break your question into two parts. I think what is that plus plus and the driver for growth for the music industry, and in context of the performing rights, I think it's a growth of the whole music industry. So I'll take the growth of the music industry. I think as the West grew at a 5 to 8% CAGR, over the last 10 years almost, India has been growing between a 15 and a 20% CAGR, right? And we've been recording growth in the region of 30 or 40%. Now that growth could either be smart economics or it could be consumption. And for the last sort of 4 to 5 years in India, it was a mixture of both. The Indian marketplace is actually now changing into a consumption-based model, right? There is, if you look at the DSPs, there's always been a very freemium, and I really don't like that word, but it's just a question of experience it and hope like hell that somebody would buy. But the difference being that if you transact with your first customer at a rupee or a dollar, there's a greater chance that at 1 billion customers, you'll make a lot of money. But if you transact with your first customer at 0, there's very little chance that the customer will make value. And I think the DSP will make value and monetary value out of it. And I think that is the cusp of change in India that you are at the moment. So we're moving into a subscription-driven economy. A lot of the DSPs are actually packaging out subscription-driven things. The record labels are actually growing lateral. At Times Music, we've actually embraced that growth really, really early. Back in 2017, we announced a partnership with Speed Records, a leading Punjabi music label. The big growth of India also comes from the diaspora markets, right? And that's the big story, that at one point, the diaspora market was, second generation, third generation. And today, it's first generation, carrying the music of today out, right? And that's expanding. And today, we're looking at pretty much for the record industry, and I speak on behalf of pretty much most of my peers, that you would find about 20 to 25% of revenues of the Indian music industry is coming from the overseas markets. In the case of Times Music, it's even higher because we're still just 25 years old. The others are older than us. But within that entire growth, right, I mean, I would sort of take a little bit of a step back and be slightly cautiously optimistic, because at that pace of growth, it's very hard to maintain that growth, especially when you're in change from a business model to a consumption-based business model. And as we all know, everyone around the table, that unless people pay for something, it's hard to maintain an ecosystem. So today, the growth, and now I'll come to consumption, I think the growth used to be on the back of technology, on the back of platforms, on the back of everything else. I think the next stage of growth is going to come on the basis of cash flow, on the basis of fans. We are no longer talking about consumers. We're no longer talking about words like users. We're talking about fans and super fans, pretty much similar to what Akshat is saying. Yeah.
So does that fans and super fans necessarily mean customer?
Absolutely.
That's somebody who pays as opposed to gives you the attention, which is
Yeah.
the point that the arbitrage is actually on wallet, share of wallet, as opposed to share of time.
I
Or a
think
bit
it's
of
a
both.
mixture of both, because with the services we may have to work on the share of time,
Yeah.
depending on the business model. But I think for us, being the core generator of a product that is used by multiple platforms, it is important, and at least it is for Times Music, to be able to grow, like I said, lateral, not keep stacking up song on top of song and hope like hell that works, right? That's one. The second thing, and I think this is really, really important to your question about consumer super fan, the difference between a consumer is a consumer consumes all. A super fan or a fan is somebody who follows a life cycle of the artist or the sports person or the product that they want, and will keep paying for that. I think India is moving very strongly, or has moved, and I say this often over the last 3 years. You can Google my name, it's always there. We have moved very fast from a song-driven transactional economy to an artist-driven economy. And at Times Music, we started changing the company close to 2 years back to create these various divisions that actually reflect that.
Okay, so 3 things I'm taking away. Share of total from diaspora is much higher. There's a forex arbitrage very clearly. 2, economics-wise, you're going to a consumption-driven economy. And 3, the yield on that's going to be higher simply because you're no longer film music-driven, but artist-driven in A&R. That's probably, these 3 are fundamentally at play driving
I think so. Look,
unnatural growth.
any form of music is
Yeah.
cyclical, like any business is,
Yeah.
right? I mean, at this stage, at one point, 90% of 90% of our revenues would come from Bollywood,
Yeah.
and today that has changed. It doesn't mean that the share of film music has gone down. It just means that the pie has increased.
Pie is
It just
increased.
means a younger-
That's fair. I'm going to just go to Nick for a bit and then come back to you. in 21-22, the ICC went with Byju's, BharatPay, Niyam, quite a few. I think there was Upstocks. I'm just wondering, what was that reflection of the market? Could you talk us through sort of what the fly on the wall conversations were like? Because there were very different industry sectors which the ICC had never actually danced with.
So these, the companies there that Unmish is referencing are commercial partners that we brought in over sort of an 18, 24-month period. And at the time, I think we certainly sensed that there were some clear dynamics at play. There was a lot of fundraising going on, a lot of VC money that was being floated in the market, and as a result, huge pace. So businesses that were mobilizing, moving very, very quickly, that were looking to associate with such spectacles and major events that the ICC hosts. And we continue to house those partners today. But certainly the winds have shifted of late. That's certainly our sense in the market. The fundraising is harder to come by for these types of younger startups. The tech environment, tech space is slightly more challenging. But that's not necessarily a bad thing and all doom and gloom. There's certainly more traditional and established sectors that are continuing to see the merits of cricket and the events that we host by which to tell their stories and a platform to engage their existing and future customers. But we have sensed, to your point, I think a changing dynamic over the past 18, 24 months. But coupled with the fact that if you look at, you mentioned the CAGR there, if you look at the sports industry CAGR in India, it was plus 14%, I think, in 22. You take sponsorship as a subset of that, it's an even higher percentage. So, and then if you look at the percentage of share that cricket has out of that sponsorship spend, it's 85+%. So when you do the maths and you look at those types of figures, you look at those continuing trends, there's certainly huge opportunity, as we would see it at the ICC and for the sport of cricket as we go forward.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that with what's going to happen in Bombay on the either semi-finals as well. Bharas, question for you. I mean, you sort of ran the messaging for the largest pan-regional pay television business. We were talking earlier today about the Cricket World Cup in 2011. Very different kind of messaging, very different kind of assumption of the TG. Talk us through what is it that, across WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, what are your insights about how that consumer is different or similar based on what Mandar and Nick are saying?
So I think one of the points which you mentioned to Mandar about is demography is one of the key ingredients. So let me frame these three, and among these threads as well that we recently launched, what role these products have in the society when I look at, and when we look at India as a model, and I'm talking about content language, the way I think it's a 5D model, and I'll tell you, illustrated how each of us get benefited from it. So there are three structural dimensions, or Ds. First is democracy. The largest and most vibrant democracy, what therefore plays out is the freedom of expression. And that is what plays out, whether there is a housewife in a small town making a light-hearted content on Indian politics, or hundreds of thousands of Indians with a similar ease commenting and expressing about the Indian cricket team selection, as much as they can talk about G20 and the outcome of it.
You can obviously see Indians have lots of opinions, as you can tell from this panel. But yeah.
The second key thing about is the diversity, the second structural dimension. There are close to 22 official languages, some of you may know, 120 recognized languages, thousands of dialects. That makes for extremely culturally vibrant country from a content creation point of view. We work with Mandar and their team, and one of the regional songs got 1.5 million reels and everything. So there's so much content which this country allows. There's so much expression it allows. The third is demography. The median age of an Indian is around 28 years. It's 38 for China, 48 for Japan. The gender ratio in favor of women last 2 decades have been rising. The dependency ratio is supposed to be 0.4 by 2030. What does it indicate? It's a very young audience. It's a very diverse audience. And if we see an example, again, I'm picking a game example, this example illustrates many stereotypes. There's a women creator from Northeast, started playing game, or started gaming during COVID, now wants enough to maintain her family and also have enough money coming out to raise a child. Now that's what the demography of India is, which therefore gives us opportunity in each of our area to do it. The fourth dimension, which I call is the sociological phenomena, and I think that's super critical, and each one of us probably would be experiencing. It's called desire. India as a society had always taken virtues as that restraint or doing with less was always worshipped. That era has changed. Now there's unapologetic desire to grow and to build. I'll give you an example. Very recently, or 2 weeks back, we launched a few programs with the Ministry of Education and Skill Building. And the education minister told us in the forum that he was speaking to one female student who was doing medical studies in a smaller town. And he asked her, what do you want to become besides being a doctor? She said, I want to be a Reels content creator because I'm very good at dancing. So this entire thing about that I want fame and fortune with freedom is right there. And the final thing is about we can't ignore the development, the fifth D in this. Currently, it's one of the industry surveys say that 60% of internet users in India consume video content. That number is 70% for Indonesia, 80% for US, and 90% for China. Now, what are the enabling factors? I think since October last year, when the 5G was announced, now 100,000 kilometers of optical fibers are laid every month. In the next 2 years, under the BharatNet scheme, there'll be 640,000 villages will be connected with high-speed internet. That gives all of us an opportunity from a content point of view. It's the biggest creator ecosystem. And we know that the base would come, or the future will come from the base. We launched one of the creator education program, which arguably is the world's largest, called Born on Instagram. It's around 700,000 creators start their journey about getting educated in 7 different languages. And 70% of them are from tier 2, tier 3 towns. So that's the milieu where each one of us and our content plays role in. And each of offerings, whether it's Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, therefore come in. I'll give you an example, like Instagram, it's about everyday connectivity and creativity, which connects you with people around you. Whether it's about a doctor, and Mandar can relate to it, who wanted to pursue his passion of becoming a singer and created one of the most viral songs. Whether it's about a software engineer who wanted to land a role in Bollywood movie. And whether at the same time, it's 1.5 million people who want to learn about how to ace an interview, go to a channel of a creator called Diksha Arora. All of that gets enabled because the everyday creativity comes to the fore. If you talk about WhatsApp, it's about social discovery that lets you discover your world in big or small way. For many Indians, Facebook is their entry to the world of internet, is their personalized feed where they get music, movies, sports. We have a partner with ICC, whether it's ICC Sports Highlights, everything. At the same point of time, Facebook is also the place where there are hundreds of thousands of groups, where a women farmer in one of the places in Maharashtra, a rural town, has a 1 million+ group of women who are coming there and getting to know about farming. At the same time, it is a group, which I found very interesting, where people come and discuss about the tips on rooftop gardening. At the same point, there's a group about, there's a creator who's created a group who's raising awareness about transgenders. So all of that gets played out. So there's as diverse use case as it could be. If you talk about WhatsApp, just finishing it off, we call it the operating software of India. So whether it's the good morning message with a coffee cup that we send to our families, or it's you talk about all the most important business updates they'll be sharing on WhatsApp. Whether it's about paying your electricity bill, you're paying your, let's say the gas or grocery mart, at the same point of time, this is the place which runs thousands of mom and pop shops to have their retail front. So our product portfolio plays in that era or in that area, which gives all of us opportunity enough to leverage on.
Fascinating. So I live in Singapore. I probably am on calls with the West Coast, I would say 3 mornings a week. And kind of think of it like 7 till 10, which is 4 till 7 for them on the West Coast. 7 o'clock here is kind of 4:30 in India. 10 o'clock is about 7:30. After 9:30, 10, I got to go to FaceTime. I can't use WhatsApp. So that's also Indonesia and India waking up, literally. And this is kind of the volume of the connectivity which sort of comes in. So for 5 Ds, so if I'm a good student, looking at democracy, desire, diversity, demography, and one more, development. Okay, thank you. I got 70%. Akshat, looking back a bit, you and I met over 5 years ago. At that time, it was a very fledgling business. It was a fledgling business because the market was fledgling. You effectively created the market and gained market share to grow the business fundamentally. What is the evolution of NODWIN gaming? What does that say about the evolution of youth culture in non-metro India? I just want to sort of make a distinction now between what's called India and Bharat. They're very different pieces. There's an Anglophonic, bilingual, very urban piece, which probably is about 10% of a billion people. And then you've got layers. Talk us through that. You know, PUBG Mobile is a very good example. Well, I'll give you the...
It'll be the same now, right? Indian Bharat.
Yeah, yeah.
What's happening right now?
Yeah.
The naming of the country.
Correct, yeah.
So it's a very interesting, it was a conundrum, right? Let's rewind a couple of years ago. 7 years ago, I wanted to do esports, had no money, put whatever money I had here, went across the world, and I said, I want to do esports in India. They were like, yeah, you know what esports is? I was like, yeah, it's the ability to get other people to watch video games. I was like, but who's playing games? And they were like, yeah, I'll get people to play video games. Like, where are the servers? I'm like, oh, we'll put servers. It's like, how do we get payments? Oh, we'll put payments. They were like, how do you get user acquisition? I'll launch a marketing agency. They were like, okay, how do we test whether you'll do a good job or not? Don't worry, I'll white label agency work for you. And then they were like, and we did all of that. So NODWIN set up each of those problem statements as solutions, opportunities to go ahead and do from problems. And eventually we went back to some of my friends here, James is here, Sean is here, and said, they were like, what did you want to do again 5 years ago? Like esports. Like, yeah, do it, right? And often enough, just that depiction of you have a vision. And we've just talked about the 5Ds. To me, the one thing that works for India right now is hope. I know it's such a weird thing, but hope. Every single person you go to in India, it's an extrapolation, so please excuse me, but most people you go to in India think tomorrow is better than today. Right? Just that. Tomorrow is going to be better than today. They don't know how, but they believe it. And then they manifest destiny because we've got lots of gods on our side. So then they make it happen. They look at that thing that is not working in the gutter and then say, hey, why don't I actually fix this? There's no electricity, let me fix it. Every time you solve a problem in India, you're making money. Or you will eventually make money. And you're seeing that in businesses. And how did that translate to NODWIN was, I couldn't compete with English being the language, lingua franca of gaming in the country of India. Because for all of you people who understand media rights, and the panel definitely does, is imagine I go to the ICC, I go to ESPN, and I'm saying, I want media rights. And it's like, what language? I'm like, English. Like, yeah, already sold for millions of dollars. They're like, you can do your language. I'm like, my language is Hindi, but nobody listens to Hindi esports. They were like, yeah, but that's what we got. I was like, okay, let's build Hindi esports. Right?
Find a commentator, do a studio show.
Find content creators, put them on Instagram, get them there, build this out, build strength out of it, and then you build a consumption pattern for content that fundamentally is local and something that is in your domain. And that's now, for example, Tamil does really well for us. We believe Bengali and Marathi will do well. And I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm just taking what the media industries across the world did. Like movies, Hollywood movies used to come in India and then started getting dubbed by Disney, first in Hindi, then in other languages. The entire media landscape in India, especially on news, if you go ahead and look at it, we have a plethora of channels in our country that is local language-based, even city-based, which is there. And the US did that earlier. US did that with English, with KBN19 sitting in
the affiliates, yeah.
Yeah. But the logic still works. We are a media consumption economy. And then the only question is KBL19 as an affiliate is your Haryana, North Haryana, Haryanvi channel And if that is the theory, then each state of India or each language of India is a market by itself. And very quickly, we'll start realizing in the next 5 to 7 years of India's growth that if you try to access or get India, you can't.
So you're effectively going back to almost like the US model of north, south, east, west, seaboard, tri-state area, Idaho, Midwest, kind of, and those are your 6 or 8 markets. That's where the upfronts happen, that's where the ad sales
But we're not just
happen.
doing an XY. I think evolutionarily, everything remains the same over generations, but you just get depth to it. So earlier it was just an X-axis, now you have an X and Y axis, now you have an X and Y and Z axis, or a Z axis, as Jasper likes to say. The reason for that is you have now language, which you just meant. So English is a language. So you can have language, you can have demographic, you can have you can have format, you can have content, like you can have cricket versus esports, whatever. And all of them gives you the multivariate accesses that you can start going in India. In 5 years' time, trust me, businesses sitting outside India will be, should I launch something in Poland and should I launch something in Maharashtra? Because that's the right question.
Economically.
Because Polish, Poland, Marathi, Maharashtra, now let's have a conversation. And if you go ahead and say India, you just like go in and say, let's launch something in Europe. How does that work?
That makes sense. So effectively, you've got a 60 million market, whether it's Maharashtra or Poland, currency is the same, jurisdiction is the same. Okay, we've got about 8.5 minutes. I want to sort of try and give you guys a bit of a sort of question, really. Let's crystal ball. I think we've got a lot of ground, demographics, 5Ds, personal experience, inside out. I'll give you 2 timelines, pick one if you want to. What is the thing that you're hoping, expecting that we might be talking about and celebrating this time next year? Or regretting, as the case might be? And what might we not be expecting, but was likely to happen in 2030? Yeah. So let me sort of probably kick off with Paras, then come to Nick, then come to Mandar, and then come back to Akshat, if that's okay. Try and keep it bite-sized, if possible.
Next year, so I think one of the biggest things that I foresee is that, which is a continuation of different phases of, and I'm talking in context of trends, very quickly saying, there was a phase which was what I saw today. And that was getting reflected in what was getting on the social media networks and every other things, even in content. The second phase was what I did today, where people actually actively participated and were okay to share that. COVID brought the third phase, which is what I feel today. Again, from a content point of view, if you see those genres, a different nature of content, and everything started to come. People were more open, they were sharing things. What I foresee now currently happening is what I want to experience and experiment with. This is where it defies the current limitations, whether in terms of content formats. So if you talk about music, whether you look at music as a unit in 1 minute or 60 seconds or 90 seconds, you can visualize the entire thing. Whether I talk about sports, a traditional broadcaster like Star Sports creating programming with creators because the sensibilities they find is very different from everything else. Whether I talk about gaming, while the gamers are streaming the entire thing, but they are building their personas in a short form video format. Whether I talk about AR and generative AI, again, people experimenting, doing new things. So this entire realm of what I can experience and what I can experiment with is what I see probably coming.
But you're fundamentally saying earlier we would respond to something we saw or heard or read. So it's outside, in, and out again. Now you're saying there's going to be a lot more expression which is indigenous. And that's a fundamental
experimentation.
difference.
It will come with both its positives and potentially less of negatives because it will limit the rights usage. It will limit the nature that you experiment can with. But at the same point, the positive is that it will be boundless creativity.
Okay. Where are we going next? Nick, and then Mandar, and Akshat.
Just before I answer the question, and just to build on Paras's point, so there's been a lot of talk around the creator community. We've felt the impact of that. So 2022 T20 Men's World Cup, there were 6.5 billion video views, content views across the tournament, which is an astronomical figure. It still blows me away. But a huge amount of that has to be credited to Reel Squad. So it was identifying key influencers and content creators for Instagram and developing bespoke content that we'd never really entertained before, and putting actually the players in an environment where they feel relaxed enough to film a lot of the content that they did. So that as an experiment, to your point, has brought untold benefit and impact for the ICC in terms of those reach and those numbers. But coming back to your question on 12 months, this time next year, we will be on the cusp of a women's tournament, not a men's tournament, in Bangladesh this time, so a women's T20. I know that women's sport has been sort of widely spoken about already today, and I'm sure yesterday as well. For us, that is absolutely true as well. The growth trajectory for women's cricket is extreme right now. 1 billion video views in excess, again, largely thanks to a great partnership that we have with Meta for the tournament in South Africa earlier this year. So if you're asking about success, it will be setting new benchmarks, breaking new records for the Women's T20 World Cup in a market that we haven't been to in a while for the women's game, and that is away from some of the bigger cricketing nations. And I think that's a really key important point for us over the coming years, is that you will see a wider number of markets hosting major tournaments. So I mentioned the US earlier. You'll see Ireland and Scotland co-hosting with England. You'll see Namibia and Zimbabwe co-hosting with South Africa. And I think that's a really important step change for the sport that we will think drive wider growth beyond some of the core markets that you might typically associate with the game.
Thanks, Nick. Before I go to Mandar, it might be the last time you have the mic. You want to talk us through Bombay semi-finals? You got Jasper mentioned something yesterday, just to refresh those who were not here or those who were here, but can get the next layer of detail.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who were here yesterday, Jasper did mention, so Cricket Matters is something that we feel is we're crying out for that in our sport. So we're targeting Mumbai, which is where the first of two semi-finals will be played, mid-November. So November 14th will be the day of the event. November 15th is the semi-final. We just see a gap and an opportunity here to create a similar forum to the one that we're enjoying here, but bespoke to cricket, put some minds together and debate all of the topical bits and pieces that are going on in our sport. So if you happen to be in the country at that point in time, I hope you will be for the finale of the tournament, then we would love to have you involved. As I say, a similar format to what we're enjoying here, but bespoke on cricket.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks ever so much. Mandar, let me give you the other one. Not this time next year, but 2030. What are we going to see which we are probably not expecting, or the largest audience, if not, might not be front of mind?
You know, we don't consider ourselves to be in the music business. We consider ourselves to be in the culture business, right? And if you look at 2030, I would be crazy to say what we would expect. Change in India is daily. It is just impossible to think the same strategy you did, everything is going to come. It is daily change. So I would just slightly reframe that question to what do you expect in the future over the next 2 years, 3 years? One of the big things that's going for India, and to take up from where Paras said, is, of course, people, right? But it doesn't mean that 1.4 billion people into $1 equal to $1.4 billion, right? A lot of them are figuring out where the next meal is. And hence, when you say India, I look at the world as an oyster. The diaspora audience, a crossover audience, and one of the biggest things we have going for ourselves is a well over 150-year-old musical legacy, English being as good as a national language, so to speak. Third part is the ability of the world's diaspora and population. Look at all the hits, look at Latin, look at Spanish, look at Korean, look at Japanese, right? And it doesn't mean it started now. The Scorpions have been going at it for a very, very long time, right? I think the world is ready for the next Indian superstar coming out of India or out of a collaboration that comes through. And we recently announced a groundbreaking partnership with our partners, Primary Wave in the US. Some of you would have heard Larry and David before. It's a first of its kind partnership and we believe in what we do. And hence that one step forward from Primary Wave to be able to try and create something. So I really, really think over the next 1, 2, or 3 years, you will probably see a superstar or 2 or hopefully 10 really spreading through culturally like the way some of the others are spread. I mean, I don't know about the rest. And it's not the crystal ball, it's about making it happen.
Can I just add one thing to Mandar's point, and it's a stat which just reinforces what he just mentioned. If you look at 2022, among the top 20 global songs which had the most reels produced globally, 14 were songs from India.
This reminds me of kids' content on YouTube 10 years ago, where, 4 out of the 10 channels was, it was Peppa Pig, but there was a whole bunch of Choo Choo Train and all that kind of stuff. There's a very different demographic here as well. Akshat, the last word.
Well, what I'd be disappointed is in 1 year if India is worse than it is right now. But on a 10-year basis, I'll tell you something that, and I've said this, and I hope it doesn't come out as wishy-washy, so I'll try to go ahead and be very succinct about it. India's superpower is collaborations. It is to find the fine line of people who hate each other and still be able to go ahead and work together. Enemy of my enemy is not my enemy. He can be my friend. And this bipolar world where you have to say, if you're not with me, you're against me, is fundamentally the wrong way to do business for India. We like to work with people. We like to work with someone who I can fundamentally disagree with on a certain point, but fundamentally agree with him on the other point. That's okay, right? And I think we will build collaborative networks more and more. We saw something like that in the G20 declaration, which is there, right? Stitching that was kind of impossible. The world has tried to do it the United Nations has tried to do it for a donkey's years, and it's not been able to go ahead and do that. It takes a lot of hard work to do that. But the success of that is a business, an ecosystem, an economy, a people who can fundamentally solve the problem of being better together. And for me, that's the way. So as NODWIN grows across the world, I want to go ahead and bring in everyone else in the world into this common vision that Kafila, this caravan keeps on getting built and people will come together in the search of something that makes our lives better. And that hope that can drive it, I hope it lasts 10 years.
Okay, so I think we're ending on a point fundamentally that 10 years from now is going to be very much the United States of India and the ability which is historical to be able to collaborate within a country, and therefore that becomes a muscle within bilateral international as well. Okay, on that positive note, gentlemen, thank you very much for the time. I give you the panel. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you, Unmish.